And we're back with Truth Unrestricted, the podcast that would have a better name if they weren't all taken. I'm Spencer, your host, and I'm back again today with returning guest, Lydia Greene. How you doing, Lydia?
Good. Thanks for inviting me out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Most of your sort of public discourse is on vaccines and your
hmm
vaccine activism, but we're talking about something completely different today, so that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a concept in my mind of a thing that I haven't seen any names for. I haven't seen anyone describe this, and it was kind of neat when I kind of came up with it. So today the topic is a thing that I call gender yin-yangism.
Yeah.
So yeah, people immediately, what are you talking about? As I get all the time in my life and on this podcast. So in Eastern philosophy, there's a concept called the yin and the yang. And in Eastern philosophy, it's usually represented by a thing that most people have seen by now. It's sort of two teardrop shapes, a white one and a black one. And inside each teardrop shape is a dot that's the opposite of that color, and they're chasing each other. And it's meant to be, I think originally it's meant to be two opposite but interconnected forces, like active and passive, and this is a force that drives the universe. It's a sort of interesting spiritual concept, but
hmm
many people just sort of generally in the undescribed sort of zeitgeist of our world see men and women as the two opposite but interconnected sort of the male and female of our world being two sort of drivers of our universe. And no one really talks about this, but it's sort of there in the background. And so I kind of want to talk about this. Um, when I think about this and I ask people about it, I usually ask people to create a list of all the words that would describe what they consider to be a man. And then after they make that list, make a separate list of all the words that would describe a woman. And then see how many of those words are just antonyms of each other, right? Because once you start this in your mind, the inference is that they have to be opposite. And of course, we know in our biology now that this isn't really true. So this is kind of where we're starting. What's your first take on this concept?
Yeah, I think there is this narrative that um gender is opposite. Like man is literally the opposite of women
Yeah.
and or woman. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think we have far more in common than different. There's a small amount of things that are different, but even like genetically, the difference between like genetically male and female is just, one chromosome.
Yeah.
So like you either have an X or a Y. And now we know there's like variations on that, that occur naturally in populations, but there's not a like compared to the other sets of chromosomes, like there's not a lot of information on that like comparable to like the rest that just make us human.
Yeah.
So the idea that like men and women are just these total opposite forces, I think is kind of, it puts too
Yeah.
much emphasis on that when we're actually quite similar.
Absolutely. And I think that what the one thing that I didn't say before that I probably should is that once a person goes through this exercise that I described of creating descriptive words for each of these two, man and woman, and if you come up with antonyms, what you'll probably find is that most of the traits that would be considered to be like positive traits would generally be in one column. And that's also part of this sort of lever that leads people to think less well of women, I think. Like what are your thoughts
Yeah.
on this? Yeah.
Well, yeah, because then the opposite
Yeah.
is if you say men are strong, then women are weak,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or so like,
Men are durable and women are delicate, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Right. Who wants to be the delicate person?
yeah. And it's disingenuous because women are strong too.
Yeah, yeah,
and
absolutely.
in a different way, but it is strength. It's
Well,
just not a strength that
less
men
muscle
value.
mass, but that's not the same thing
Yeah.
as being the opposite of strong.
And anyone
Yeah,
that works around women who deliver babies
yeah,
knows
yeah,
how strong women are.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, but it doesn't, because men can't do it, it's not valued by men as strength, I think. And that's a huge part of the issue too, is
His,
like,
yeah, historically, that's been the case that
yeah,
yeah, motherhood's also not usually in history typically hasn't been seen as an important part of lives in the
yeah,
past because motherhood didn't determine the course of wars or politics or anything like that.
yeah. And
But
it's
that's
funny
been
because
wrong. Yeah.
they should ask mothers, because mothers are the ones giving up their children to go die in these wars, and they know exactly how hard it is to create that life to begin with. And
Yeah.
I think that they should have a say, because when there is a catastrophic loss of life, they're the ones, picking up the pieces and replacing the people that die.
Yeah.
But that's just a fact of life. It's not really considered valuable, or like looked at as in a regard.
Yeah. And the way we view this, I mean, we have a history, a long noted history, and most of our history is just told in stories. The way we've told stories in the past has been from a primarily a male perspective. In the past, stories were generally written by men, and they were meant to be for an audience of men, and they tended to have male protagonists for that reason. And that's not to say that it's an excuse; it's just a reason. But that's part of how we've cast our view of the world. Whenever we look at the totality of stories, and all the stories are male heroes, that's the reason why. And this is, that's also a part of what we're really talking about here, is that
Have
we
you
have these.
seen,
Sorry.
speaking of that, have you seen the reaction of certain men to the Barbie movie?
Oh, I guess this is an interesting week to record this podcast. Yeah, that's
They are freaking out because
yeah.
Barbie has all of the roles, all of the occupations, and then Ken is just a prop.
He was
And they're
always just
mad
a
that
prop.
Ken's a prop. He's like a side project, side prop
Yeah.
to like prop up Barbie. And like, I didn't even play with Barbies that much, but even I understand that Ken was just an afterthought.
Yeah.
He's like a prop for Barbie to live her life. Like,
He's
he's
an
not meant to
accessory
be a
to
main
Barbie's
character.
life.
He's an
Yes.
accessory. And so to see all these men just angry that Ken is just this himbo, doesn't have many thoughts, just kind of is a prop for the main character energy of the Barbie. First of all, most movies are like that in opposite. For decades, they've
Yeah.
been like that,
Oh yeah.
where women are just kind of side characters and props to make men look strong and
Just
desirable.
they're in many cases the female character is meant only to expand and say something about the male character. They're a married
Yeah,
person. They have sexual energy of this kind or whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not meant as like to be a deep, rich character. And we've had to deal with that for years.
Yeah,
And so there's
there's
one movie
actual
about,
rules for this. I can't remember the name
yeah.
of it. What's the rule about the female uh
Oh
protagonists, or
yeah, yeah.
number of the
There's a
number of
rubric.
female characters and the number of actual
Yeah.
lines they
What is
have in a
that
movie?
rubric
Yeah.
called?
The Bechtel test, which is sort of a measure of how many female characters are in a story, in a movie or TV show, and not only how many characters there are, but how many substantive lines they have, how often we hear them speak. Uh, that's a real measure now, and we're almost getting to the point where we sort of in many cases move past it, where we don't have to consider it much anymore, which is good.
Mhm.
But of course, in some cases, we still have to tell. You mentioned Barbie. We can't mention Barbie without Oppenheimer, but
Mhm.
we have this situation where in the past, women generally weren't well represented in sciences, and you tell a historical tale about Oppenheimer. And I haven't read anything about the movie, but I assume it has to do with the atomic bomb and the making of it.
Yeah.
And there weren't a lot of women involved in that, really, on the
Mhm.
forefront of that. They were female mathematicians that were sitting in rooms doing calculations alongside male mathematicians, because at long last they needed to do something so quickly that they couldn't turn aside female help for it. So they just took everyone who had any significant ability at mathematics, and they set them in these rooms to do these calculations, because without computers, it was a phenomenal amount of calculation needed to work out how to make an atomic weapon. But those were the only women involved. All the physicists were all men, because they didn't have any. They didn't train any. They didn't, there was so few women, and women were
Yeah.
discouraged from doing that because intelligence was considered to be a male thing,
Yeah.
which is awful.
Yeah. Men are good at math.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
like,
yeah. That's what we're told.
how
Yeah,
would that affect how you teach women math? If you're
yeah,
taught men are good at math and women are not, or boys are good at math and girls are not, like
yes.
how would you like teach girls if you have that bias?
Well, and also if we are subtly telling girls that
Oh
they
yeah.
won't need to know it, how many will try?
Yeah. So then it's gonna look like, yeah,
That
more men are
that
better at
alone
math.
would affect how well they do on math tests in school. If you don't try as hard for it, you're probably not
Yeah.
going to do as well. If you
And
want
I
to do it
think
and you try harder, you're probably going to do better. Yeah.
and then I think society also is catered to how boys learn because
Oh, yeah. All of this, like all of our, the structure for how we go about post-secondary, especially, and
yeah.
structure careers around education is mainly built around an ideal life structure for a male in our society, right?
Hmm.
And we got this in a lot of ways from ideas that the Romans had. In ancient Rome, as a male, you would go off to war or other things, and then you would start to think about marrying sometime around your mid 20s, and you would, try to, ideally get yourself set up to marry someone who was younger.
Hmm.
I don't know the exact age, somewhere around 15, 16, 17 kind of time frame, right? I
Hmm.
mean, this was, unless you're a rich Roman, that their lives were different, but ordinary Romans, this was well known. That as a young person, go off to war, as a young man, go off to war, come back from the war before you're, start to decline in ability, and then have children, have more Romans. And we structure our lives this way now. We educate, and then we go to post secondary immediately. We say that it's because we want to have the most time to use that education, and we do. But the prime childbearing years are also occurring in this time for women and not for men. So it just so happens that men tend to be after their post secondary, once they're entering their kind of more of their, their prime childbearing
Hmm.
years are still well in availability, whereas most women who go through this arduous thing, especially if you do the really tough stuff like doctors and lawyers and whatnot, you either have to try to have children while
Yeah.
you're doing all that, or you have to try to do it after.
Yeah.
And it's totally possible, absolutely, but it just that many more degrees more difficult, and we don't have, I think we're getting there. We're getting to a situation in some areas of our world where it's easier to take time off to have relationships and maybe
Mhm.
have children and whatnot, but we still haven't really found a way to get there across all of our society. And that's not ideal for women. It's less ideal for women, much less ideal for women. And that's another reason why, just one more reason why women might choose to start families rather than go to college, for
Mhm.
example. Even now, I mean, this isn't the 1950s or 60s. This is the, 2023, and
Yeah.
we still have real structures in our world that would, in many, many subtle ways, encourage a young woman to settle down and make a family right after high school rather than to go to college and get an education.
Yeah. Depending on your culture and what kind of
Well,
family you're in, and
yeah,
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 or even
that,
just
yeah,
I'm not encouraging my daughter to do that right after high school, but I did tell
no,
her, as a mother that had a kid in her 20s, my kids are very far apart.
mm-hmm.
The amount of energy you bring your kid in your 20s is vastly different in my experience, and probably others, I don't know for sure, uh, when you're almost 40, you know, the amount of
Mm,
energy you have for them when you're younger is a lot better, and the
right,
patience you have is a lot greater. And so I've told her, like, I'm not saying you should have all your kids, when you're out of high school, but if you are, with someone you're looking to do that with, maybe mid 20s would be better if you're wanting to have energy.
well,
But she
that's
has the benefit of a supportive family that, will help her, and hopefully she chooses a good partner and all that. She's still quite young, but
yeah, a
I
lot of a
kind of
lot of
told
hoops
her
to jump through,
there's a
or potential
difference
roadblocks. Yeah,
between having kids when you're young and having them when you're older, and both are valid. I mean, some people want to do their career while they're young. Um, and I did both. I ended up having to go back anyway because if you start with your career and then raise kids, they're not going to like hold your job for you if you decide to raise them more than a year, you
yeah,
know, before you return to work. So the time goes by, my education became out of date. So I'd have to do all this like post-secondary upgrading anyway because I wasn't we're actively in the field. And so I just like, why do that when I can just start fresh and pick something else?
right,
So I think a lot of women don't realize is you're gonna go back to school anyway.
yeah,
Whether you have kids young and go back to school after, or whether had an education and took a break. Like, people change their careers multiple times in their lives,
yeah.
and it doesn't have
Now,
to be a
absolutely,
factor necessarily.
yeah. So I think we should circle back to kind of get back on track
Oh
here.
yeah,
It's been a great tangent, and it's all good, but I just think that we should try to stick to where we are,
sure.
which
I
is
go off
that,
on tangents. You'll have to bring me
oh,
back.
this podcast is all about that, but it's always also about me wrangling people back to where we got to be. Um, so gender yin-yangism, this idea that we have, that men and women are opposites, and we this opposite, life force or whatever. There's a couple of things that generally come up in conversations about this that I want to bring up, and we just talk about each one briefly. So first of all, in a sexual context, it's often cast as givers and receivers,
Mhm.
which is sort of a euphemistic way to describe the sexual act, but also, I think, increasingly just not all that accurate as far as these go. And we'll probably try to not get too into the details on this, but the idea that men are always the sort of initiators or the dominant
Mhm.
in these scenarios is increasingly pierced by all the things that happen in pornography.
Mm-hmm.
where this isn't happening, or this is happening in many different ways all over the place. And while some people try to cast that as, oh, those are extreme people or extreme examples of things, and they don't represent normal everyday people. And well, I don't know what happens in the bedrooms of
I think it
the
is
people, but
warping other people's real life expectations.
sure.
I think the media, what people consume in media, whether that be, Instagram models or flat out pornography, is warping people's minds. I saw a post where a guy called Margot Robbie, who is gorgeous, mid. And I was like, you, sir, you need to go outside. I think you've been consuming so much touched up, photoshopped, filtered media that you forgot what women look like.
So hold on. So that I have this straight. This was a guy.
A guy on Twitter actually
Okay.
posted that Margot Robbie, who is
Barbie.
Barbie and gorgeous,
Yeah.
he called her mid, which means like
Oh,
a 5 out of 10, you know?
oh, right. Not that attractive. Yeah, this
Yeah.
is a
And I was like,
common.
you
Yeah,
need to go touch grass and see people in real life. Like go to a carnival,
this is
go
the
to a
upset
mall.
male who is attempting to drain the social value from a woman,
Yeah.
and thinks that her only value to society is her looks, and therefore
Yeah.
removing some of the value of those looks. Oh, she's not that attractive, so obviously she's not worth that much. That's
Yeah.
also hilarious, because if anyone in our world has a right to be called objectively beautiful, it's Margot Robbie.
I know,
Okay,
right? Like
let's just call
insane.
that as it is.
Insane. Like,
Yeah.
and then of course you look at his profile picture and you're like,
Mm,
yeah, you
yeah.
look like someone who should be the arbiter on who is and who isn't mid. Have you looked in a mirror? It's
Yeah.
always the most pathetic looking people that'll say the nastiest things about women's bodies or faces.
Right. And
Um,
that kind of
yeah,
sort of puts the edge on the way this is cast unfairly against women, which is that he will say that his value is not found in his attractiveness. His
mm-hmm.
value to society is not found in his attractiveness. It's found in whatever else, what he does for a living or
Yeah,
whatever, right? And that's more of this thing where we tell little girls that they should try to be beautiful, and little boys that they should try to be useful.
yeah,
um you know Taken to a set about generation after generation, and then let loose on the world and the internet. That's its manifestation in real life right there. is
I
is
have changed the way I raise my kids a little bit in
Yeah.
terms of like traditional. I look at it as like, regardless of who they partner with, I want them to be a good partner.
Yeah.
And the values that I adhere to my boy kids and my girl kid when it comes to being a good partner are the same.
Right.
And it has nothing to do with, these like traditional roles. Is like, are you helpful? Are you in tune with somebody's emotions? Can you look at someone and go, wow, you look like you're having a bad day? You want to talk about it? Like things that make you a good partner and make you good to live with. Because
Right.
everyone wants their kids to find someone good, but are your kids good?
Yeah.
Like,
Are
are
you?
you good? Everyone wants to find a good partner, but are you a good partner?
Well, you know what this is, right? This is the parenting version of the Michael Jackson principle, which is that in order to change the world, you change the man in the mirror. Only in your
Yeah,
case, you don't change everyone else's kids, you change your own kids, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, this is how you be a good partner. This is what a good partner looks like.
Yeah.
We try to role model a respectable relationship because I want it to be so absurd when something disrespecting happens. I want it to be like an insult. like an immediate insult where it feels wrong, you know? So if my husband and I are fighting and calling each other names, when my kids go out into the world and someone does the same to them, it's just something that becomes comfortable.
Mm. Something they recognize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where if you raise your kids to not just not have these gender roles, but just to be a good partner, and those qualities are universal to all partners, I think we'd have a lot better. Because there's a lot of resentment, I think, between men and women because there are these, so to speak, gender roles that
Yeah.
you grow up with and expect, but our current society isn't like that anymore.
The fact that we won't openly talk about these sort of hidden social expectations in our world only adds to the confusion that we experience once we are, put in the world to face them.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I can see it when my husband's with my kids, and then he's doing like basic parenting, and
Yeah.
like older people will come up to him and act like he's a god. Like, oh my God, look at you go.
The
Way to
lowered
go,
level
man.
of
And
expectation. Yeah.
he's literally just wearing our baby in a
Yeah.
baby carrier while we're walking around the grocery store.
True.
Like
But
he's
I,
holding his kid.
I will say that I will back that up, that we do need to, in some ways, it is somewhat disheartening that men will get that level of praise for something so simple. But I
Yeah.
also think that we do need to be in a place where we first recognize the utility and give
Oh yeah.
praise to men who actually do that, because that's already a step forward. Hopefully we get
Yeah, we
past that
haven't
step, and
arrived
it
yet.
it doesn't, yeah,
So
we haven't really got there yet. And so we need that step where people give actual positive praise to men who do that, and hopefully then we move past that phase and move to the phase where that's just normal and expected of every father.
I'll think we're there when we stop saying men babysit their kids. Right?
Yeah.
I'm watching them, I'm taking care of them, I'm parenting, but my when you say my husband is babysitting, I'm like, no,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
no, it's
And that's interesting how we use, just how we word things affects how we see things.
yeah.
Which brings me to some other things that we phrases that we have in our world that have enhanced this idea, the idea that I'm trying to tear down slowly as we go here.
You know
Uh,
what? And I just have a thought on that.
sure, yeah.
And maybe it's because babysitting is literally work. It's paid work,
Yeah.
right? But like mothering is just expected of me. And
Yeah.
like I should be doing it. Why would I get praised for that? Right.
That's the
But when they
that's the
call me,
level of social expectation for you, is that you be a
yeah.
mother.
But
Yeah.
like when men watch their kids, they call it babysitting because it spins it in this like frame of like he's working. He's
Yeah.
it's work for him.
Probably we should call it fathering,
Yeah.
which should be no problem with, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do notice there's more social media groups that are devoted to being good dads.
Right.
There are, and that's what I love. Like social media has been awful, but it's also been good in that it's allowing men who want to change and be good dads and be good partners to kind of talk to each other and say, I want to do better,
Yeah.
like
Trying to
I'll
find
be a good
ways to be
dad.
better. Yeah.
Yeah.
And resources for
So
that.
I think that's interesting that there are men that are trying to change. And that's where I judge, like, because there are male feminists that specifically talk to women about their feminism or whatever. And I don't trust them because why are you telling me about it? I don't need to hear
Yeah.
it. I know exactly what goes on out there. Why are you telling me?
That sounds like some virtue signaling action to me.
Yeah, like I don't
Really.
care what you think about this. You don't need to tell me. I already lived this.
Yeah.
You need to go talk to the other men.
I have another episode that I did that's one of my favorites now. It's a concept called the explicit paradox, whereby once a person is attempting to explain a concept, usually about themselves, that really they should just be doing and demonstrating with their everyday activities, but instead are attempting to explicitly speak about it, the audience tends to get, their intended audience tends to get the impression that it's less like that than more so like that. It moves in the opposite direction. And I think
Yeah.
that's what you're noticing there, is that the more they talk about it, the less you think they're really doing it. Yeah.
I have cracked jokes like, I wouldn't let you watch my cup of coffee. Okay. Just so we're clear, there's something about you preaching
Yeah.
this to me and other women that makes me find you very untrustable.
Yeah. You know what? Just do it. Just do all
Just
those
go talk
things.
to the other men.
Just
Stop talking to
demonstrate
me.
doing it to them. Just,
Yeah.
and then expect it of them too, silently. Yeah. But we have a couple other phrases here that we use in our parlance, and they attempt to, they sort of, I don't know if they fit inside this idea, they come from this idea, or maybe they just help to cement this idea into place that I think shouldn't be here at all. But one of them is that opposites attract. So
Mm-hmm.
I've always, for a very long time, railed against this for other reasons, but mostly as a person trained in physics. In physics, things that are electrically opposite in charge do attract each other, but
Mm-hmm.
that's only in the electrical physical sense. Gravitation does not work this way. You don't have to have an opposite gravitational charge for two pieces of mass to attract each other. It's just a sort of a thing that people talk about. They talk about magnetism and opposites attract. And this is not, in my experience with humans, isn't really true. You don't need opposites in order to have two people be attracted to each other. It's just sort of a common trope that's often
If
put into
anything,
teen
it's your
dramas.
commonalities, right?
Yeah,
Um,
you have to have
yeah,
things in
it's having,
common. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it's nice to have some conflict, like positive conflict, because there's positive conflict in relationships, right?
sure.
And through that conflict comes growth. Like, for instance, my husband is a homebody. He
Mm,
is not a fan of travel. He finds it, the idea of it very stressful. And I am an adventurer. I very much fly by the seat of my pants. And so I'll plan trips. And
mm,
then he'll join and he'll be like, not wanting to at first, but once we get where we are and everything's working out, he's very glad that
right,
I came up with the idea, right? And
right.
so in that way we complement each other because he's more cautious. So
Reluctantly
he
dragged
can
along. Yeah,
yeah, he's more cautious and sometimes he'll temper me when my ideas are a little too out there because
yeah.
sometimes I dream big, you know.
Put a little cold
so
water on that
so
fire.
he'll
Yeah,
like and so we kind of balance each other that way. But in terms of like hobbies, things we like watching, things we like doing, we have everything in common there.
right.
So we're not opposite in like what we like and enjoy, but we are opposite maybe in our temperaments
Mm,
and how we approach problem solving.
right.
But if you have two people that are different, sometimes like that, it can be frustrating, but it also can be how you get the best outcomes from situations.
Yeah, well, it's really just a thing that we just generally deal with in our lives. It's definitely not necessary to have someone of an opposite temperament to be your partner in life.
Yeah.
Um, it's just a thing that when there are differences, you either have to find a way to work with them or find a new partner. That's just what that
Yeah.
means. It
It's
doesn't
either
mean that they're
complementary or it's
needed in
not.
order for attraction to occur. But the way that we use this saying, it sort of implies that there does need to be this and that there does need to be this
No.
separation, which is totally not true at all. Right.
And in fact, if there's too much different,
Yeah.
you're not gonna be compatible because there's
Yeah.
just too many
It
differences.
just won't work.
Yeah. It just doesn't work because now one person is having to give up who they are or what they enjoy so the other person is comfortable. And that's no
Yeah.
way to live your life. Like
Yeah. It's
that's
no
not
good.
fun.
So, which, I mean, this lends directly to the next sort of common saying that we have. We have a concept of the battle of the sexes,
Mm-hmm.
which we've all heard this. It's the idea that there's a battle going on between men and women, and that they are at odds with each other, and that they're on opposite sides of a battle, and that they're never going to be on the same side. There's always going to be this conflict going on. I mean, this imagery is sort of always cast in this scenario, and I don't know the origin of this
I
expression.
think that there's like this ownership with men, like a club that I can tell that where they're reluctant to let women in on. And in terms of like careers and hobbies and stuff, like men are like, oh, like, no, we don't want women here. Or like they get like kind of gatekeeping about what they're doing. Where
Yeah,
like if men show interest in something I enjoy, I'm happy to share with them.
yeah,
Even if it's like not, even if it's not a traditionally feminine thing, let's say, but even if it is, like if you want to know something about, let's say, makeup or whatever, like traditionally female hobbies, baking, whatever, I'm more than happy. I'm not going to gatekeep and be like, well,
no,
ask your
that's
grandma.
that's not a man's thing to know, kind of thing. Yeah,
Yeah, where I feel
right.
like it's like, especially as a female gamer, when I
Yeah.
play like competitive games like Overwatch or whatever, and then I talk in a female voice, they're like, make me a sandwich,
Oh,
and
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like,
right.
because they just don't want you there. Or they call
Yeah,
you a fake gamer because you're trying to, be cool or whatever. Like you just get all these accusations. And
yeah,
I
like the
don't
fact
see
that you're
that.
female at all, because you
Yeah.
would get attention in that scenario, the fact that you would let anyone know that you're female is itself some kind of virtue signaling, and
And you
this is a
can't
thing that
win.
should be poo-pooed on, which the idea that someone's entire person itself is a smarmy virtue signal is pretty dark. And like I say, I don't know if I've put it on this podcast anywhere else, but I mentioned that I used to play World of Warcraft a lot. But I met my wife playing World of Warcraft,
That's amazing.
and
My husband and I played so much WoW together when we first started dating.
yeah,
And I remember I was pregnant with my first kid and I'd like have like junk food like resting on my fat belly. Like, wow.
yeah.
Eating candy and donuts.
But
Um, yeah.
she experienced this, and other women experienced this, and it became a real a thing that I still think isn't very well spoken or very well articulated about
Yeah.
what was going on in that game, which was that when you had different guilds, you would tend to have an atmosphere within that guild based on how the people were interacting, and based on how that atmosphere was, you would either be a guild that had no women at all,
Yep.
essentially no women, or like maybe one or two, or like a bunch because the women were fleeing those other social spaces because they didn't feel comfortable and going to ones in which they did. And that was a sort of a undercurrent in my WoW life, was realizing that once you got to a certain point of sort of a critical mass, if you will, of female influence in a guild. And like I was in some guilds where there were women there, but they never talked. And then it was hard to get to that level of critical mass because they just weren't engaging. But once you got to a certain level of that, the men behaved differently. They were just more calm, social. They were more aware of what they were saying. They were less like a locker room. They were more like a lunchroom, right? I mean, and that's I saw that happen in different guilds,
Yeah.
and it was amazing to see. And once I realized what was happening, it was just really amazing. I was like, oh, this is happening this way because we have just a bunch of women here, and the women feel
Yeah.
comfortable, and all of that is just working together to make a whole different atmosphere.
You want to know something interesting that I've been looking in is psychology and like end of life and mental health. And the funny thing is, women do phenomenally well without men. They do. They
Yeah.
live longer, they're happier, they form meaningful relationships. they are able to move on with their lives once
Hmm.
they untangle, trauma and things like that that make them think they need to be codependently involved with men. Once
Right.
they get that healing in and they decide, you know what, I'm just going to live my life and I'm going to live it for me and I'm going to do what I want. And they have really fulfilling lives. And a lot of men, when they see women like that, they'll be like, enjoy dying alone with your cats.
Yeah.
And it's projection. And here's why: men die alone, they die alone often and they die younger than women. And it's not necessarily that they have more health issues than women, it's that when they reach end of life, they don't form meaningful relationships, they don't help out with grandkids, they tend to isolate, they don't they don't try to make new friendships and bonds, and they do end up dying alone.
Right.
In old folks homes, I saw that a lot, where like
So
men didn't have visitors, didn't have family come in, like they were alone.
you just said a lot of sort of really incredible things all at once there. So I'm wondering if I can unpack them
Sure.
simply without making a whole new episode out of it. Um, so, first of all, I think that the idea that women do better on their own is probably more true when those women are financially stable.
Yes.
And in our times now, that's more true than it used to be, and that's
Yes.
good. So that, I think I can just unpack that, leave that right there. Another thing is that resentment that you have undoubtedly seen in your life about this idea that, oh, be happy, uh, I hope you die alone with your cats, or whatever it was you
Yeah.
said it better than I did. um, that comes from, and this is the one that's going to be tricky for me to unpack, and sort of the most, I don't know, probably potentially explosive or whatever. But it comes from the idea that, less so now, but men of an older generation, and technically I am part of that generation, less so mine than the one before me, but still part of it, which was that in so many thousands of tiny, tiny ways, when I was growing up and becoming an adult through my teenagehood and all of this, I was taught that, I wasn't taught as in anyone just told me the words. I was taught, like I say, in many, many thousands of many, many tiny ways, that my value, and we touched on this earlier, my value
Mhm.
would be in what I could accomplish and produce in society. It wasn't
Mhm.
going to be in any way involved in what I looked like, really, or any of those things. It was all going to do with what I could accomplish. And that's, I mean, we can look at it as a thing that drove men to accomplish things. It encouraged them. It raised the level of social expectation in regards to what they should accomplish, and maybe that was good. But it also told me that in relationships, my value in the relationship was going to be in wrapped up in what I could bring materially to the relationship. And it
Mhm.
was, my generation was sort of, a little bit more divorced from the idea that the man should be the breadwinner. It was
Mhm.
still there, but it was sort of the idea that the two, man and woman will work, but the man will have the majority of the wealth brought to the relationship, and so most of the, not all, but most of it will fall on them. And so when I see a man saying things like this, I disagree with them, but I do understand why they think that. It's
Yeah.
not great. It's
It's not
because
enough anymore. So the
because
other thing,
they
yeah.
felt that their value should be in what they could provide, and they are sort of, it's a smear. It's a sort of a backhanded. I mean, it's obviously an insult, but it's a backhanded way of trying to say, because I'm, and men like me aren't going to provide for you, you will die poor and also
Yeah.
alone. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's awful.
Yes.
Like that, why we don't look at that and see that as a sign of a sickness in our society
Yeah.
is I think we should try to change, because
Well,
that's
and
not how
today
it
it's
should
just
be.
untrue. It's
It's
so
less
untrue
true
today.
today.
Yeah,
It's less
it's
true
less
today.
true. Yeah, it's less true today.
Right.
Women are the majority of people in post-secondary right now are women. Women
Yes.
outnumber men
Yeah.
pursuing education. Women are a lot more capable of supporting themselves. And another phenomenon I've seen on social media, because they are just not getting the respect in dating culture that they want, is they've given up. And what they're doing is women are cohabitating. They're doing the things that they would do with a husband, and it's not homosexual in
Hmm.
nature. They
Yeah.
are settling down with their best friends.
Yeah.
They are buying homes together, in some cases having children together.
Right.
Um, and
This
just
this wraps sorry, but this wraps
yeah,
right into the third incredible thing that you threw them all out in about four
yeah, I've been
sentences.
doing this a lot. I've
Yeah,
been doing a
but
lot of like
because
discussions
you
online.
said that when the women who were no longer with their partners were doing better as they get older, it was easier to make friends than the men.
Yeah,
That is all to do with the effects of masculine toxicity, right?
yeah.
It's because of the way that we didn't raise men to be this way, I don't think, but we've allowed them to be this way. We've
They've
lowered the
certainly
level of
received the
social
message.
expectation for them,
Yeah.
such that men can be that way. And we're less good at making friends, being okay
Hmm.
with other men, all of those things. And
Yeah.
that's again slowly going away, where we have a word to describe that effect now, which is good.
Yeah.
And we have a way of pointing it out, and pointing out why it's wrong, why we shouldn't be that way. It'll
I have
probably
a
still take
personal
several
anecdote to
generations.
share
Oh, sure.
recently. I don't know if you noticed my post about actually meeting friends, but
I did. Yeah.
I went out with friends last night, and they're new friends
Mm-hmm.
because COVID nuked a lot of my relationships, as changing my perspective on a lot of stuff. I felt maybe I didn't fit in with some of the friendships I used to have.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been a few years since I've had a local friend where I could just call up and say, "Hey, you want to grab a coffee or a drink somewhere?" I have no, and when I finished my final for nursing school, I felt lonely. My husband was working nights. I felt pretty lonely. I was like, I'm so bummed I don't have relationships in this town. And I said, you know what? Never mind. I'm going to change that. I'm going to do something about it. It's never going to change unless I do something about it. And I have social anxiety. I can talk to 200 people in a
Mm-hmm.
room, no problem,
But
that I
to
don't
try to get to
know.
know them,
But
yeah,
to like introduce myself and
experience
say, "Do
empathy
you
with
want to
them,
be my
that's different. Yeah.
friend?" Yeah. So I started a nerd group a few months back because I wanted to know who in town likes nerdy stuff. And nerds tend
Mm-hmm.
to be a bit more progressive, and I'm kind of picky about that. I don't want to hang out with bigots. So I found two women that I recognized from school
Wait,
pickup
are you
line.
bigoted against bigots?
Yes,
How dare you?
no shame.
Okay.
And so I found two girls in the pickup line that I liked. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to ask them to join me for a celebratory drink
Yeah.
because I'll never know unless I ask. And it was an awkward, I'm like, I know you barely know me and I know we haven't actually talked, but like, would you join me for a drink tomorrow night? And both said yes. And my husband, who is a fairly progressive man,
Mm-hmm.
said, you know what you just did? This is why I admire women because they can just do stuff like this. And I would never, because my husband doesn't have friends in town either.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I would rather die of loneliness and suicide than do what you just did.
Yeah.
And he's like, I know that that's bad. And I know that that's wrong.
Yeah.
But like, this is how we are conditioned. Like to
Yeah.
do what you just did, say, hey, I know we don't know each other, but you want to hang out as friends.
Yeah.
Like that's so hard for men to do.
Oh, yeah.
And they often do die alone because their suicide rates are much higher,
Yeah.
because
Um,
they really cannot say something as simple as, will you be my friend?
yeah, I admit, even now, knowing that, I still would have difficulty doing that. weird part of my social constructs inside my brain that
Yeah.
veer me away from that. Yeah,
Yep.
I don't know.
Part of it's there's so many different roots in toxic masculinity. Like men are supposed to be tough and go at it alone. There's also the no homo thing. Like, what if they
Well,
think,
yeah, and
you
part of that
know?
is what I mentioned about the expectation was that we be useful and do all the things, and
Yeah,
therefore have to not suffer any weaknesses or downturns or anything like that, and
yeah.
definitely don't show them. Yeah,
Like, or if they do ask someone to hang out, they're like, no homo.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
They have to make it more awkward. Like they think it's making it less awkward, but it makes it more awkward when they say that. Like
I
they feel they
I
have to
am guilty of
clarify.
that. I am guilty of exactly that exact thing. This is funny.
Yeah.
This happened. This was a person that I work with who might even hear this episode. I don't know, but he was joking one day and at work, and we were talking about something, and it's like, yeah, now we're best friends. And my immediate response, partly because I thought it was just humorous, but my immediate
Yeah.
response was to tell him, okay, but no dick pics.
Yeah.
That was my first response. Instead of being, yeah, cool, man. Yeah.
You know what's funny is women can share like even that level of intimacy and not have it be romantic at all.
Yeah. You
Like
can
I
handle
can
it much
send
better than
to
we
one of my
can.
best
Yeah.
girlfriends, I can send her a picture, like I think my boobs look spot on today, and just send her a picture. She'd be like, yeah, that looks amazing.
Yeah.
And there's like nothing weird about
No.
it.
Yeah. There's no way
Like
that would.
men never, and I'm not saying they should, maybe we're just a little too close, but like
Well, no. Well, I don't.
but like
I
men
don't
just
know
there's
where the line should
no
be drawn for anyone else.
yeah,
Yeah. But I don't know if
it's
that puts anyone
crazy.
too close. But I think you're right that we are raised differently in this way, and that's not
Yeah.
great. But
Like I wouldn't even have to clarify, like I am not hitting on you.
yeah,
By
you
the
wouldn't.
way. Like
No.
there's no clarification.
Yeah. No, not at all. Yeah. And I've overheard other conversations between women when they, just because I was around, and I know that they don't need to clarify that stuff. They don't. It doesn't need qualifiers. It doesn't need these gatekeeping markers to
Hmm.
keep people at certain distances and certain aspects. They don't seem to, or they probably have just fewer of those, right?
Yeah.
Than men do because of all the problems with. But I should just do a whole separate episode on toxic masculinity. Is what I should do. That's
Yeah, there's a
obviously
good
that's, yeah,
film.
because that's never. So I'm going to try to wrap this up here. Um,
Sure.
Tie this up in a bow in just a couple sentences here. In the same way that we now have the term toxic masculinity to refer to a concept that we'd like to point out and show why it's wrong, I hopefully would like to have gender yin-yangism become also a phrase that we can use for a concept that we would like to
Hmm.
point out when we see it, to show people that it's not useful, to continue thinking that way, because
It's very reductive.
oh yeah, it's far too simplistic to describe
Yeah.
actual human life,
Yeah.
and less so now than ever. And
Yeah.
so it's an idea that needs to go away, really.
I'm because a lot of men are kind of upset. I think that's why we're seeing this Andrew Tate type
Mm,
masculinity come in, is because men are
mm.
starting to pick up that women have had enough and they're having like a temper tantrum about it. Like it's the death rattle of misogyny, I think.
Yeah, in the same way that when a society gets desperate, they tend to do more extreme things like
Yeah.
suicide bombings and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And I think
um,
that so when they
that's what
come
we're
onto my
seeing with
page,
toxic masculinity. We're seeing
yeah.
sort of an increase in the level of rhetoric,
Yeah.
not really suicide bombing, but increase in the level of rhetoric to try to protect an idea that they haven't even really thought about yet.
Yeah. And the way they go on about relationships with women, it's so shallow and evil almost. Like they really don't see women as people. And I don't even think a lot of them like women
In Andrew Tate's
outside of like,
world,
yeah,
the value of a woman is entirely reduced to their level of attractiveness.
yeah.
Entirely. That's
I
their
have a
only
funny
value to
TikTok I'll
him.
send you after this that I made when I'm man. So I had commented on someone's page and I said, because I did get a little bit of Botox because I frown a lot. People make me mad and I'm getting these like deep grooves. And the guy was like, gross. I don't even like Botox. And I made this video where I just proceed to lose my shit on him. Like, oh, were you gonna date me with if that was like you're drawing the line, you're setting yourself up to ask me out on a date, but then you read that I got Botox 2 weeks ago and now you're not gonna? Is
Yeah.
that it?
Right.
Like, why do I
Yeah.
care what you
Why
think?
did that person feel like their level of judgment about you was
Yeah,
useful in
like,
that
did I
conversation?
ask you?
Yeah. Yeah. Or
I went
did
out
anyone
of my
else ask them? Probably no one.
No, I was
Yeah.
talking to another woman about beauty habits and beauty
Yeah.
routine and things we do to make ourselves feel better. I want her input, actually. And I think a lot of women do when they put on nice clothes. They appreciate comments from other women because there's nothing attached. Like we
Yeah.
just appreciate each other, right?
And you
Where
probably get
like,
a more honest answer,
yeah, where like men are
a
like,
more
I would never
descriptive
date you.
answer
Well, I
than
wasn't
you look
asking
nice.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't
Yeah.
asking you. It's fine.
Yeah.
Like we don't do everything for you. In fact, most things women do are pretty much for other women. When
Yeah.
they dress nice, when they look nice, they go to work looking nice, they're doing it for their female peers more than their male peers. I promise you. Like yeah, I don't know. And so they have this notion that everything we do is to make them happy.
Well, that's also the thing that's true in Andrew Tate's world, is that
Yeah.
the two things about women are that they should be attractive and that they should be attractive for the men. And
Mm-hmm.
that's everything in his world. It's so
Yeah, it's about making
simple.
them feel good and not
Yeah.
yourself. And
Yeah.
I just
Because
let him
their
have. I'm like,
feelings don't matter. Yeah.
everything I do is for myself. It's
Well,
so
everything
I like
everyone
what I see.
does should be for themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, and the right people will like it.
Yeah.
So whatever. I don't know.
Okay.
It just
Well, I'm gonna wrap this up now.
all
And
right.
so it was great having you on again, Lydia,
Yeah, thanks for having me.
talking
I
about things that are outside the normal box of what we talk about. That's always refreshing.
yeah.
And hopefully we get to do it again.
All right. Well, you have a good day, Spencer.
You too, Lydia. Until
Bye.
next time.